painstaking.
2. We spend 40 minutes with those who dig the Mighty Leek.
Total prize. All right, gentlemen, can I just begin by confirming that the dates of the competition are last weekend in September. Once again, we have the world record amount of prize money available for the League Championship. We have 40 individual prizes, and first prize will be £1,200 plus a nice trophy. Okay, I've got 1 or 2 notes down here. Bill, can we begin by just getting an update from you on the number of entries and results?
Someone got me the leeks, and I just did as I was told. I put 3 in one show and 1 and 3 in the other show and 1, and that is just pure luck, you know, and that was fantastic. They win 2 shows with 6 leeks. Now, after that, I never won another show. And a friend of mine, he said to me, he says, Harry, you're not spending enough time on your leeks. Leek's like a woman, likes plenty of attention, because they say you go around and you're dressed in the leek. They love to be dressed, you know, and you just quietly bend these flags over. And at the moment, I've been looking after 2,000, and there's been nothing else getting done. The leek show is won early in the year, you know, the early days when they're just little babies. That's when you can lose them. You can lose all your leeks if you're not careful, you know. And I had a problem because I wasn't getting any light till February, you see, which meant I was growing in the dark, and the leeks wouldn't grow. Leeks won't grow in the dark. So that's how I come to use this. Leeks under lights. No, we've done it, haven't you? That's 12 o'clock. 12 minutes, it's late.
Great. Last year when he won 6 shows out of 6. It was fantastic. I was at the mall. Harry doesn't show any excitement, you see. He keeps calm. And I'm not quite like that.
Right, that's it.
He hasn't had the special strain of leek for very long, and he's done marvellously with it because it's his own strain, you know.
It doesn't take an Oxford down to grow leeks, mind. Anybody could grow leeks, but to grow the big leeks, there's a kind of a skill attached to it, a knowledge, but you've got to have the right strain. You cannot get feathers off a hedgehog, mind. It's as simple as that. You put a big one in and you get a bigger note. And I want a lot of luck. I want a bloody good force for the new year. That's what I want. It just grew and grew, and I was dumbfounded myself at how these leeks grew. Then I decided at 8 o'clock in the morning on the Saturday morning, and the shoe, they had to be dressed and washed into shoe by 10, that I was going to show these leeks. And I took 3 out, which I thought would do the job, and there was one exceptional one, and it was 107.88. It's the WRSL, the World Record Super Leek. Whether it turns out to be a World Record Super Leek again, well, just time will tell. I know they're looking well at the moment, but the show is not next week or the week after. It's in the last week in September, and that's really a long time to gain for leeks.
Challenge every year. Doesn't matter how well I do, even if I win a show, I'm not really satisfied. I always think to myself, well, if I hadn't done that, I'd have probably done better. My father came here in 1914. He was a very keen gardener. He was also a pigeon man as well. I think he was looking for punishment, he was looking for work, really. But when he died, I took over the gardening side and George took the pigeon side over. This worked out quite well.
Howie, come on! Howie! Come on! Come on then! Howie then! Come on! Howie!
The size is there to be beaten every year. And you're always straining to do better, trying to do better. And I think the very fact that leek measurements have gone up over the years proves that. I think they're on course, but it isn't what they're like now, it's what they're like when you get them on the bench at Ashington that matters. It's what the judge says, not what we think.
Each exhibitor must have 3 leeks, each of which has to be 6 inches to a fast button. And that goes onto the root plate where the leek actually starts, the flesh of the leek. That goes in there, and you say this is vertical. I get a vertical measurement, and I read off on there up to the fast button. That's where the leaves converge. That must be fast. If there's any deformity or if that's split, which it tends to do because it's a stress point in the leek, then that leek cannot be included in the stand. The leek is measured by volume. If you consider it more or less a cylinder, measure from the fast button down towards the root plate. We'll say it's 6 inches. This cylinder, you measure the circumference, and we have tables which by calculation give us the volume of that particular leek. So each leek, of course, is measured separately. It's a separate item. And then you get the addition of the 3 leeks, which produces the measurement for that particular stand of 3 leeks.
This is probably an average leek. There are a lot pretty similar in the trench. What I like about it is that it's nice and short in the barrel, and by being short I mean it's short to the button, which is there. And the advantage of that is that as the leek grows, naturally something's got to give, and it's usually the outside flag that splits, and that of course has to come off. And each flag that's taken off lengthens the barrel of the leek, and the limit is 6 inches. So while it's imperative to get the leek as near 6 inches as possible, you don't want them 6 inches and a tenth, or it's just too bad. They can't be shown. That's just on 13 inches. Now that's exceptionally large for this time of the year. Seasons differ, and it's difficult to just time the leek for when you want it. Some people get them right on, other people have fired away too strongly and they've gone over the top and blown up. So I think you want a bit of skill, but you want a bit of luck as well.
There's not much luck to it. No, it's mainly hard work. It took me 10 years to get this leek, and to do that I spent every weekend on my hands and knees. I logged every leek to see just how they were growing, and I logged the diameter, measured the length, measured the width of the flags. And it used to take me all weekend, Saturday and Sunday, logging it. Now I have a bit of help, of course, because I've got a scribe that does it, so I don't have to wipe my hands every time I beat down to the leek. It's all in here, but I'll put a clean one on here. That's quite good for this time of year. Now that gives me 12.5 round, and the 12.5 round I haven't got. I've got the tables in there. 12.5 rounds are quite a good size leek. Now when I planted out this year, my leeks were about 1/4 of an inch bigger in diameter. But when I come to take the first logging, I found I was down on last year, and that's probably due to the fact that I've had to change allotments. So I've got some work to do, and it was best to bring them up to the fertility of the previous allotment I had.
If I had a garden full of these, I wouldn't be worried about nobody. But there's a long time to go. Now I always leave one cracked flag on for the next time I'll be looking at it. 12 inches. That's a cracking leek for this time of the year. I mean, some of these leeks has got more a month and a half. I mean, the last week in September is the World Championships at the Northern at Ashington, and that's really the ultimate and what I'm trying for. I've got some good leeks farther down. The foliage is looking bonny. It's off this World Super Leek, so I am expecting something good.
I only took up gardening when I was 45. I bought a greenhouse, and I thought, well, if I give myself 20 years, I might know a little bit about gardening. Oh, it didn't take 20 years. I retired after 15. And I just stepped out of work and into the garden, and I never missed going to work. I felt free for the first time in my life.
It's the best thing that ever happened to me, retiring. I wouldn't like to go back to work. Summer mornings I spend an hour, probably an hour and a half, then go back and have breakfast. Come down again till lunchtime, and then come back again and stay till tea time, and then come back after tea for 2 or 3 hours. I never have 5 spare minutes.
I'm a little bit envious when these fellas is retired and I've got to go to work. It's more competitive now than it's ever been. There's people paying a lot of money for the best strains of leeks. And now with the redundancy payments they're getting in the mines and they haven't got a job, they're trying their hand at leeks. They're full-time leek men. And they're taking some beating now.
Are ready to go up, George?
Yes, aye. Okay.
How's the birds doing this morning? Are they fairly fit, do you think?
Well, I think they're better than they are. I think.
When my brother and I first joined Stanhope Lake Club, prize money wasn't that high in those days. Probably the first prize would be a canteen of cutlery, and towards the end of the prize list, a packet of 10 cigarettes, something like that. It wasn't very much, but it was always valued. People liked to win it. I think these big open shows, especially the shows like Ashington, they've done a great deal for leek growing. We've entered it 3 times in all. We've been very fortunate. We've had 2 wins and a second.
If you win the World Championships, everybody's looking for your seed. They want it, for them to do the same.
This becomes 5-3. I'm putting the markers on just in case they get pinched, because if they get pinched now, they'll have to cut their markers out and it will find the leaks then. Because they'll either find them with the markers on or I'll find them with the flags cut out. You see, they'll have to cut nearly the centre of the leek out to do it. You see? So I'm hoping that no one will try it. It's only the beginning as far as I'm concerned. I think I've made a start and I've caught up with the big lads, as they say, you know. Joey Jones and Bob Bell. Never thought I was in the same league as them. One thing about growing, you know, you only get 1 try a year. From 75 to 85 was 10 years. That was only like 10 tries, you know. In 10 years, it's not a lot. You don't get much of an opportunity to play around.
It's a bloody good job I've got a good wife. She goes to Spain and she goes with sister and everybody, and they're going away for a fortnight. All that's left after me is the dog. I look after him. Sometimes he doesn't get fed and he's eating half bricks by the time they come back. But never mind, we'll survive. There you are. If I went away on holiday for a fortnight, it would kill me wondering what was happening here. You've got to be really dedicated. I'm not saying you should grow 200 or 250 like myself. I think I can overboard. I'll have to cut down. I mean, I've seen me on a Saturday night and Sunday night in the garden. Hoeing leeks, watering leeks. Well, they're sitting in the pub playing the hussy card and drinking their bone ale. Why, who are they going to beat me? It's the same when they're going away to Spain. They're lying on the beach soaking all the sun up. I'm here pouring water on leeks, man. When they're not going to beat me.
I think we very, very lucky to live up here. I was born in number 6, and lived in number 6 till I moved to number 4. Joe was the only one in the family that was born at Rummelkirk, and the rest of us was born at Stanhope, in number 6, Railway Terrace.
Well, I was brought up in number 6 and went to school from there. Later on, I married Claire. I moved next door to number 7. More recently, we've moved along to our present home, which is number 3. And while all these cottages have a very pleasant view, I think the houses at this end of the street probably have the advantage of the woodland, which is a typical country scene. And me being 100% countryman, I think the scene's really, really tremendous.
Joe goes out every morning and brings fresh vegetables in, and the potatoes is taken up fresh until they're taken up in the back end, of course. So we really get fresh vegetables every day.
I think that is an advantage of having a garden, the fresh produce you can get from it each day. Really well worthwhile. Never eat the shore leeks. It's sacrilege to eat them. They're too good to eat, really. And anything that's big tends to lose its flavour, I believe, so you would be better with a smaller thing.
I think that's maybe a fallacy about them big lakes. They're really good. Any lake's good. They're a most marvellous vegetable. And whereas an onion will repeat on some people, lakes won't. And there's a certain thing called lake pie. It's gorgeous.
Very few people will earn up to things which I do.
Good night, sweetheart. All my prayers are for you. Good night, sweetheart. I'm
a great believer that everything which lives on earth responds to sound. And I come down here at night and put a recording, probably of Al Burley singing Good Night, Sweetheart. I've different music for different occasions. For example, when a leek is on the verge of flowering to pollinate, I'll probably put Johnny Mathis singing Let's Do It.
Tomorrow, dreams enfold you in them
To win the World Championship, there must be about close on 1 million leeks planted to try and win that share. Some gardeners will plant 100 to 200 to try and get 3 leeks. This is how difficult it is.
Well, he's a big one, but he's burst, and he's not a very good shape. Different condition result of the leak. Good guy with a good rooting system. Not bad.
Now all these are all marked because I've got them all in their rows, as you know. And one is 8-7, that's this one here. I want 8-7 up.
I think it might be all right. Oh, yes. Yes, about 5 3/4. I do.
7-5.
Do you want the paper off?
Leave it, just leave them there just now. 7-5.
For the love that's in your eye. There now. What we're going to do here.
You should make a matching set if they're all right. And we'll take these up to the top and then we'll see. And we'll see what's happening. If we're lucky, we won't have any more to dig up. I doubt if we'll be lucky, you never are.
Right on the button of 6. Now.
It's all right when you've got them, you get a lift. But if something goes wrong, then down you go.
He's on the top. Wow, we're getting on. Over the top.
That flag's no use, but I've got 3 to take off. But that one, and that one, and because that one's split, I've got that one to take off as well.
I think it'll be all right again, with a little bit of luck. Almost on 6, not quite.
There's a mark on there. There's also a mark there. So I may have to either take this flag off or go and find another leak to try and match it up. So you see, it's always difficult to get that third one. There's always something goes wrong.
Too long, another one knackered.
Uh, 10, 18, 26, 2, 27, 15, 177.66, which isn't going to be enough for a world championship when you want something like 250. I've never had a year like this for leeks going in bannons. They don't look healthy, man. Don't look a bit healthy. Look at the state of them. I want to know what's causing that. This new allotment I've got, it just isn't right. And the leeks I'm getting are not bad. I mean, the leeks I'm getting are a lot better than the run-of-the-mill lads that have been gardening for years. But for me, it's not good enough. Because my leeks have been getting better every year. And this year I put better leeks out than last year. And I knew within a fortnight that I was having something wrong, because when I did the first logging, the leeks weren't right then. After a fortnight, there was something wrong straight away. And that was when I knew I was going to have trouble. You see, and I've had trouble all the year. And normally I only water the leeks, but this year I've had to force feed them. I've had to more or less nurse them along week by week, check them week by week, and then give them a little bit of liquid feed or a little bit of this, that, and the other, you know, just as I thought they might need it, you know, just to keep them going. And I'm satisfied with what I've done. It's been a year of learning. I've learned a lot this year about how to handle leeks when you're having trouble. So it'll probably pay off in later years. Might take about 5 years to get back up top again.
If you can give me one up, Brian, if you can, please. Right. You can maybe manage the other one. You can carry one if you like, Bill.
Morning. Mr. Jones.
Thanks.
And put the buttons to the right-hand side of me, Drew, if you can.
No, he hasn't got you down here.
He hasn't got me down. He's got the chair. Don't get too far down on the white.
No, you look here.
Is it a big entry?
Quite a big entry, huh?
Yeah.
Yes. This is yours, Bob?
Aye. All right, Bill.
All right, Bill. 25.
Stick him to the right, you can, first.
Right.
Top 5. You got a bit of volume?
Oh, yeah, that's...
I need a bit.
And the bar's open till 4 this afternoon. All the friends have travelled from all over the country. Nice to see everybody.
Canny leeks, nice and soon, just under 200, but they're not good enough in this class, like.
Well, like everybody else, they've lost the biggest, but they'll all say that.
Everybody says that.
Where do you think you'll finish it with them?
I don't know, it depends. Last year I was 220, I was 10th. You never know, there's a batch of lakes in, it might be 260s, 290s. It depends on the judge's system.
I can see the way some of the Durham lads think that our shoes should be 2 leeks at 6 inches, and I say 3 leeks at 6 inches. 3 is definitely harder to get, and it'll make it more expert-like to get 3 instead of 2.
We're improving, yes, but we improve its standards from here, from these shows, don't we? I mean, when you see the quality of this leek, and you go back home, you have to improve your technique a little bit.
Number 19. 5. The biggest leeks are not always the most perfect leeks. In many shows you'll find that the biggest leeks have not got the first place because of some imperfection which that stand of leek carries. Soil marks, bulbosity, bulbous bottom, you deduct points for that. Green on the barrel where it should be purely white, and consequent, a smaller, more perfect stand of leeks would be higher rated.
It seems to be a man's thing. We showed my husband's name because a lot of women can't get in, you know, but oh, I like the leeks. This is my 3rd year up here, isn't it? 3rd year, we just come up to have a look, and it's, you've got to see them to believe them, like, you know, massive.
But look at the root plate on this one. It's gone ginger, in my opinion. That's been stood in water, you know. Then I go to the foliage, dead. So, I think that's not fresh dug.
I've just seen him.
And he's not bringing another one.
Yeah.
Oh, well, leave it.
Oh, should I just withdraw them?
Does he say he wants them withdrawn? He'll be last.
I will just withdraw them then.
Tell him he'll be last. If you want them, how many stands are there, Dick?
That would be 51 now.
Aye, I will be 51st. If he leaves them there, I'll be 51. The top ones were outstandingly good. They've been good and outstanding right from the start. But when it came to the lesser prizes, say the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, etc., there was a bit tight decision making. And then again in some of the smaller ones, and everybody likes that place. Everybody likes to be in that correct place.
Everybody expects us to do well. I expect to do well myself, but you could only try your best.
Sorry.
Steve Cram gets beat sometimes, doesn't he? And I get beat, and I'll get beat. But that's not the end of the world. You've just got to get on with it. It's the leek capable of doing it, but not this year, I'm afraid.
But tonight's winner, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, the winner of the McEwen's Lager Leek Championship, and we're about to bring them on stage with a total cubic capacity of 273.12, a prize of £1,200 plus the trophy from County Durham, Mr. Joe Jones. Well done, sir.
Name's the biggest leeks that's ever win the Northern Show. And his leek in this area, well, it'll be talked about for a long time to come.
Yeah, but next year we'll be back.
Club was a mecca for some of the best growers in Britain.
How many got? Six.
It was the 13th running of the World Open Leek and World Heaviest Onion Championships. They staggered in all morning under hernia-inducing vegetables. The leeks really oughtn't to be as good as this after the summer we've had. All here to compete for a first prize for leeks of £1,300, first prize for onions of £850. Local growers competing with gardeners from Nottingham, Scotland, Cumbria and Yorkshire. And first, there's the leek judging. The man who has to sort out the champions from the soup makers, Bill Clyde. Now then, what are you looking for?
Right. I'm mainly looking for perfection, which of course is very seldom one gets. You've got to take what you get. So, first of all, to try and get perfection, you want size, then quality. It's a mixture of both.
And how do you determine the size?
The size, well, I put this on and I get the length from the root plate to the button. That determines the length, to all three in consecutive order. And then I put a spot on the mid mark, on the halfway mark, after getting that size. We'll say that size is 6, which incidentally this leek, no it isn't, it's 5.9 this one. I put a mark halfway down there, and that's where I put the bottom with my tape. Then I measure the circumference, like that, get the circumference, then transfer that to here, to a card. I've already made this card up because I did these when we come. So I've got the length and I've got the circumference for each separate leek. I get a total of those three, which in this instant comes to 224.32. That's the total capacity, volume if you wish, of the leeks. Then after that, I've got to start taking points off. I judge according to the Club Industrial Union judging standards, which are set, which I have here, and I can knock off so many points for this, on which I put on the reverse. I put those on the reverse of the card, so many points off for greening, which these ones haven't got. That's greening below the button. Decaying marks, which you'll say, as a decaying mark starting to show itself there, well, I can take from 4 to 11 points off for that. There's another one, you see. And there's another one. So I can take off marks according to the defects in each particular leek.
Now, what about the other sort of cosmetic things about the leek? Do you take into account the quality of the root, if the root's been well presented, for example?
I take into consideration the quality of all the leek, top. When it comes to where a decision's got to be made between A, B and C stands, then you've got to take everything into consideration.
So blemishes and marks on the flags would count against it as well?
Eventually, should the totals of leeks and their other defects come pretty close, then one would need to look at the greenery, the flags, and the root. Quite a lot of roots, the sole plate is hollowed. You've got to take that into consideration, which is not apparent when you see the top of the leek, but when you put them on the bench and start to decide which has got to be which, where there's money involved, of course, between A, B and C, then the root plate certainly is taken into consideration.
What's the standard like this year?
From what I've seen, pretty big, what I've seen. I haven't seen a lot. I've just... I
know you're still working your way through them. It's going to be a long, hard job today.
I've got quite a lot to get through, yeah. And it takes quite a bit of time because you can't just take... It's not just a question of size. Were it just size, then the job would be very simple. Were it just quality, the job would be just simple again. But you've got to consider size and quality, condition, solidity, You've got to take all that into consideration. And if you judge off the standardisation as I have done for quite a lot of years, it's laid out there.
Now, there's an awful lot of money and prestige and pride riding on your decision. Do you never find at the end of one of these shows you have to do a runner?
No. I stay here all night. And I must say this quite clearly, and it's actual truth. I've used this show, this will be the 13th year. I'm nearly sure it's the 13th year, and I've used this. And I've been here every till Saturday night till it's finished. I've had no problems. I measure people out. There's got to be 6 inches, you know. Each leak must not exceed 6 inches. Well, if a leak's over 6 inches, that's when I may get a little bit of concern by the exhibitor, who thinks that his leaks are not over 6, but I think they are over 6. And if I think they're over 6, then that's it.
So there can be sharp words sometimes?
Yes, but not very often. I'm pleased to say, of course. I've had no bother at all.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. Well, while the league judging goes on in the peace and quiet of the upstairs lounge, downstairs we find the second half of this World Championship competition. It's a rather noisier affair, trying to find the world's heaviest onion.
Well, it looks a beauty. It must be hollow because it's £8.13 and 1/8 ounces. It's a big one because it's from Raby in the Wirral, nice part of Britain down there in Merseyside. Scouser, and it's a good onion. And it's £10, 9 3/4 ounces. Very good indeed. It's a good one. Well, you're not going to believe this because we've already said that the world record is £11 2 ounces. We've broken it, and it's going to be a canny one to follow because Mr. Robert Holland from Cumnock in Ayrshire, an onion weighing £11 6 7/8 ounces.
So, congratulations to Robert Holland of Cumnock in Ayrshire, who twice in a week broke the world record for the heaviest undressed onion. First at Harrogate and then here at Ashington. But hang on a minute, where were you lot when they were handing the trophies out? Doesn't say much for Geordie gardening pride, does it? Letting a Scotsman walk off with a trophy. Good job that a retired miner from Hordern, Tom Molyneux, won the Leek trophy and the £1,300 first prize. At least he spared Geordie blushes. But next year, you onion men are going to have to do better, aren't you? We'll be keeping an eye on you. But anyway, the bulbs we're dealing with now aren't going to win any prizes, but they will give a very nice show in the spring, as they say, in Sally Legg's Cramlington garden. Well, you've got a grand selection here.
Yeah, plenty to choose from.
It's a lovely time of the year, though, isn't it? The first time we can really look forward to spring.
Yeah, I suppose it's something to look forward to, but you know you've got the winter in between.
Now, you're digging a fairly deep hole there, so I assume we're starting off with daffodils.
That's right, about 6 inches deep they need to go, because otherwise if you put them much shallower, you might stand the chance of putting a fork through them when you start off in the spring, digging over.
Well, you're almost down to 6 inches.
Not far off.
If you carry on with that, it's a good idea to, in the bottom of the hole, put a bit of sharp sand or grit to bed the bulbs onto. Because the last thing you want is if you've got that bulb sitting there, an air pocket underneath it that fills up with water and rots the bottom of the bulb. So do you want to put a bit of...
Yeah, particularly in this weather, it's not exactly the best for bulb planting.
Shove a bit of that in. I presume you're going to put them in clumps as well, are you?
That's right. They look a lot better if you put them in groups of 3 or 5 and sort of, you get more of an impact, and then as they start to naturalise, the group will spread out from there.
And these are...
It's a mixed bunch. If you go to your local garden centre, you can get kind of a mixed bag and fill it with whatever colours you want.
There you are. There's one for starters. Bed them well in.
Thanks. I'll put these in a group of 3, I think. So I'll put another one. That's great.
That's grand.
And then just cover them over.
Now, because we've got the long days of winter to get through, and you're going to be doing a bit of garden and maintenance at the beginning of the spring, it's also important to remember where you put the damn things.
Or else you're never going to find them again. You're likely to dig them up and think, what have I done with this? So there we go.
So that's the daffs. Now, you've got some crocus here. Shall we put some crocus in down this bit? I'll put this sand out of your way. Now, obviously, you're not going to put those as deep, just about 3 inches.
That's right, about 3 inches.
And again, I think it looks much better to put them in clumps rather than in straight lines. The crocus do tend to look a bit daft if they're in a straight line along the end of the bed.
There you go, that's probably
There,
about
give me some
right.
of those to put in.
Do you want to put a bit of sand in
Oh,
on
I'll
this
put
one?
this on. No, that's right, you keep me right now. You keep me right. There you go. That's it. Make sure you get them the right way up.
Yeah. Don't want to confuse them anymore.
That's grand.
That'll do us in that one.
And one thing to remember is, I mean, almost all bulbs are put in this way, but there are some oddities. Some of the anemones, I noticed that they're very hard corms, and I think it's they certainly advise that for these you should actually soak them before you put them in.
I mean, any of the small bulbs, as soon as you've bought them, it's best to keep them somewhere damp, because if they're small, they haven't got much chance of holding the moisture in.
Terrible danger of drying out, yeah. Also, if you wanted to do cyclamen, some of the bedding cyclamens, you definitely don't bury those.
No, right on the surface. They're sort of a woodland plant. They're used to growing underneath leaf litter underneath the trees, so they expect to be quite close to the surface.
Just right on the surface, just leaving the surface exposed. And again, when that starts to grow, because they are softer than the bulbs we've got there, don't water in the middle of them. You end up with all sorts of rot if you do that. But you've got a lovely selection to be going on with. But you've decided not just to put them into the soil beds. You've got to put them into this gravel as well.
Gravel as well.
Well, our loyal viewers will remember the back-breaking work we put in getting this gravel bed down, because we put a woven plastic sheet underneath to hold the weed back.
And it's worked.
Certainly
Saved
has.
me a lot of work this summer.
It's tremendous. But putting bulbs into here, we've had to cut that sheet. And what are the bulbs you've chosen to put in this corner?
A dwarf daffodil, because it's very windy across this corner, and I thought that if I put a tall one in, it's likely to get blown away before I even get to see the flowers, so I've gone for a little dwarf one.
Well, we've cut just a cross in the sheet, put a little bit of sharp sand again to the bottom, just bed those in well.
Again, just a little group of 3.
And we'll just pull that sheet back around them as much as possible, so the nastier weeds will be held back. And then I presume we just
cover them over again and wait till spring.
And by my reckoning, you've only got another 170 bulbs to do, so by about Saturday lunchtime we should be finished.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, welcome back. While Sally Legg continues to plant her bulbs in Cramlington, we've come to Gateshead now, where Ken Lilly is going to demonstrate what any fool can do, planting bulbs for Christmas. It's easy, isn't it? All you do is you take a container with no holes in the bottom, fill it up with bulb fibre, stick your bulbs in, should be a newspaper over it, Bob's your uncle.
No, I'm afraid not. Bulb fibre doesn't contain any nutrients at all. There's nothing in there for the bulb to survive on. It's a bad idea. You're far better using a soils compost or a loam-based compost like Johnny's.
Because basically if you put the bulbs into there, there's nothing for the bulb to feed on, it's using all its own resources up, and
you can only use it for 1 year.
You throw it away.
You have to throw it away. Yeah.
Okay, how would you do it?
Well, whether it's loam-based or a loamless compost, it's not really that important. The fact that it's got nutrients in is the most important factor. So you want it decently on the bottom. The hyacinths, they don't want to be touching, just placed around the outside.
Now these ones you're putting in are prepared bulbs, and it's important to say there are two sorts, prepared and unprepared.
Yeah, if the treatment you would give the bulbs, if you were to use prepared bulbs, they'll be in flower about 4 weeks before unprepared bulbs. You pay slightly more, but you're going to catch like the Christmas market if you buy the prepared bulbs.
But could the amateur prepare the bulbs himself?
No, it's really very precise, laboratory controlled temperatures and time periods. So it's not something you could attempt yourself. If you get it wrong, you'll not end up with the plant and flower at the right time, you know.
Okay, so you've got the hyacinths in, they're not touching there.
Yeah, that's about it. And you want a bit compost over the top, just firm down, just so it's virtually level with the top of the bulb. Firm around the sides a bit. Right, now that would be watered in. Then you'd have to house it somewhere cool. So
how cool does it need to be? I mean, if you're living in a 12th floor flat and you want to grow one pot, I mean, what do? You put it in the salad chiller in your fridge, or?
As a last resort, yeah. If you don't have a garden, a balcony, something like that, preferably north-facing, somewhere where you can keep the temperature fairly constant. Now, it doesn't want to rise above 9 degrees.
The old way of doing it was to wrap it up in newspaper or black polythene or something and stick it outside. Now, do you cover it in that way?
Well, we'll cover it with wet sand. You want a 2-inch layer of wet sand on the top of the pot. Make sure it's kept damp at all times. North-facing in a cold frame. If you don't have a cold frame, a balcony, a cellar, garage.
And how long are you going to leave it in those sort of cold conditions?
Well, if it's a prepared bulb, this would need to be in the conditions I've just described for about 8 weeks. Right? Now, if it's an unprepared bulb that you've just bought from the supermarket, you'd have to leave it for 12 weeks. Right. So, obviously, depending on when you want it in flower, that would determine which bulb you're going to buy.
And if you were doing a lot of pots, you don't have to be as precise with the sand cover as this. You can just set them all together and heap the sand over them.
Yeah.
That'll work just the same.
That's fine, yeah. As long as
what happens if you got... I mean, you've actually managed to leave in this pot a little space there to get your sand cover on. A lot of people will probably find, to get the bulbs separated, the bulbs will be right up to the top of the pot. No space to put the sand.
That's no problem. So the pot's filled to about here, and you sit your bulbs in. You haven't got room for the 2 to 3 inches of sand that's needed to keep that temperature down. All you have to do is use a bigger pot, full-size pot. If you're using a 5, you'd have to use a 6 full-size pot, and just drop that in there, sand on the top, level with the top. That'll give you your 3 inches that you need.
Would the same time period apply to, we've done hyacinths here, would it apply to daffodils, narcissi?
Yeah, it's virtually the same. It's just a different time period and different temperature control. But as I say, it's not something that the amateur wants to even attempt.
Now, what about tulip bulbs? Because I know that it's slightly different the way you deal with these.
Yeah, with the tulip, it's the same principle. The compost in the bottom. Sit your bulbs round the outside. Now, a little tip with the with the tulips is, if you notice, they do have a slightly flat side compared to a rounder side. Now, with tulips, the first leaf that comes off is always the biggest and broadest. So if the flat side goes to the edge of the pot, your large leaf will come over.
All right. So if you lay that in there with the flat side up against the edge of the pot, and it's going to encourage you to come out that way.
Yeah, and it allows a lot more light into the inside of the pot for the development of the plants. And they want to be positioned virtually the same around the outside.
You've got that one the wrong way around, Mr. Lilly.
Sorry.
Right. Just keep it right, never worry about that.
Compost again. You may need, as the plants are growing, you may need to feed with a fairly mild liquid feed, not a very strong, once a fortnight, perhaps alternating it. Now, as you see, that's about the level you want, okay? By the time that's watered and settled, it'll drop down, give you enough room to water. But you still need your 2 to 3 inches of sand on top. And as I said before, in a cold frame, there's no problem. You just shovel it on, rake it level. But
so that one would have to go into a larger
That would have to go into a larger full-size pot to get your 2 to 3 inches there.
Now, once you've had your 8 weeks in those cold conditions,
yeah,
you're going to want to... And the idea of that is to get the root growth going, isn't it?
That's it, exactly, yeah. If we were to knock that out the pot now, the whole thing would just fall apart. But simply because there hasn't been any vegetative growth on the top doesn't mean to say the bottom stands still. Make a really strong root system which will hold on to the compost. Then it's just a case of putting the pot on its side, all the sand off, and then you house it in the normal way. And it doesn't have to be anything very, very hot. Above 13 degrees is enough to introduce vegetative growth in the plant. So fairly constant north-facing, no higher than 9 degrees for the cold period. House and keeping about 13 to 15 degrees is quite ample.
Well, you've exploded a few myths there, haven't you?
Try to.
Well, thank you very much. And if your Christmas bulbs don't work, the person to write to is Ken Lilly, the Old Greenhouse, Gateshead. Before we stop thinking about bulbs, one final hint. If you've been working with hyacinth bulbs, these scales on the bulb can be a bit like fiberglass. They break off, get into your hands, make your hands itch like mad. So once you've got your bulbs potted, don't give your hands a good wash. Finally tonight, a reminder of our Earth Movers competition. You know, we're looking for your best gardening photograph. We've had dozens of entries so far, demonstrating just how hard some of you work, demonstrating various aspects of your gardening life. How to pot up a cat in Northallerton, how to brighten up Crimdon in County Durham, and I've certainly never thought of Peter Lee as looking anything like this. But we want your entries too, so get snapping, and you send them to the usual address, Earth Movers Competition, the Old Potting Shed, Tyne Tees Television, City Road, Newcastle upon Tyne, NE1 2AL. That's Earth Movers Competition, Tyne Tees Television, City Road, Newcastle upon Tyne, NE1 2AL. And the first prize, £50 worth of gardening books for Christmas. We'll be back at the same time next week. Till then, from all of us, good gardening.
It's usually the clients that specify whether they want it signed underhand or under seal. If it's a particularly touchy contract, for example, I can quite see circumstances where a client in the nuclear industry who has problems with poisoning the ground with nuclear waste, etc., would want to tie that contractor up for 12 years to ensure that he still has some recourse under the contract up to 12 years in advance. Other little bits of civil engineering work that aren't particularly environmentally a problem or contractually a problem, he's not going to go under seal, he just wants a contract underhand. And the majority of contracts are underhand, not under seal.
Is that in addition to the guarantee period on the actual...
The maintenance period? Yes, that is in addition to the maintenance period.
So in actual fact, say if you've got a 2-year guarantee on your commodity, exactly what you provided, And up to 12 years after that, he can still he's got recourse money to actually promote.
If he's got, for example, audit rights under the contract, he can come back and audit the books up to 12 years. And the company I work for, that actually happened. It was an American company who had a change of executive management over in the States, and somebody decided to go back and have a look at all the contracts that the firm had done for the last 17 years. And he came back and he went through all the wages sheets and what costs.
What do they actually do after that, during that 12-year period?
What can they do? They have those sort of rights that I've just outlined. They have can't actually make you go back and put anything right if you've got a 12-month maintenance period. What they can do is go back for faulty workmanship if you've been neglectful in the construction techniques. Okay, things go wrong, and that's the sort of things that happen that get put out for 12 months maintenance or 6 months maintenance. But if anything is drastically wrong, you've provided the wrong equipment or faulty equipment, things with flaws in, you may go back and put that right.
This is right up to 12 years after the event?
Yeah.
What happens if you destroy paper if you're wrong in default?
Company I work for, I've got porta cabins, about 1,000 stuff with microfilm, people going on it. It's usually the original documentation, not microfilm. In any case, you've got a legal advantage for 7 years. Okay, so, I mean, in all your handling of paperwork, particularly if you get called on to sort paperwork out the end of the job, it's worth remembering. But don't throw anything away until you're absolutely sure it's not required. Okay, so that covers contracts in writing. Occasionally contracts are verbal. I can't offhand think of any examples where I would be involved in a construction contract. Starting off from first principles, it was purely on a verbal basis. Unless you can get, a chairman of one company talking to a chairman of the other and saying, "You need to get the job doing. Can you go and do it tomorrow morning? We'll follow it with an order." I mean, that sometimes happens.
How binding is, for instance, say, telex of intent on a contract?
Right, that's the next point.
Because we've had an occasion where we've actually completed a contract based on the telex of intent and the fact that the terms of the contract cannot be agreed until about 3 or 4 months after the actual job's now made.
Right. Presumably you're including in that letter of intent as well as text?
Yes. I mean, obviously that's the initial thing that kicks it off.
Right. This particular shop was done for another course, so it's subcontractors on there, but it's equally applicable to contractors. Letters or telexes of intent are really there to give the two parties that are entering into the contract the means by which to commence the contract without actually having a formal contract signed. Very often, the terms and conditions of a contract are there are so many of them and they're so bulky that little things are still being agreed some months after the contract has really been formed on the basis. But the client or the contractor, when it's a subcontractor, often feels that he's not in a position to place an order or make a contract until those little things are ironed out. But he wants the guy to start on site. So the letter or telex of intent is the short answer to it. It's not entirely satisfactory because there are all sorts of things like site insurances and everything that really are sort of overlooked by letters of intent. But they're generally used where you can see there, the final minor technical and commercial negotiation is not complete. And it's urgent that the contractor or subcontractor gets out on the site and starts work. The client's got a program he's got to work to, he's got to get finished by the winter. He wants to get him started on the site as quickly as possible. The wording of the telex or letter of intent really covers those items there. The work description, what's got to be done under the contract. The tender reference, obviously if there's going to be a contract, the contractor or the subcontractor has put in a tender. You need to refer back to that just to record that it's that tender that this letter of intent is in respect of. We need a programme, and we need to tell them to start that programme. What happens if suddenly, after 2 months' work, everything falls down? Some of these minor technical and commercial negotiations now become major, and decide not to pay the contract. Perhaps the poor contractor is spending a lot of labour and materials and plant costs. Well, the letter of intent has to put in a contingency for that. That basically means the client says, if this contract does not go ahead, I will pay you under these terms. Right? I will pay you, for example, your costs plus a fee. Right? If it does go ahead, those terms will lapse on the merger of our rights into the main contract proper. So if it goes ahead, forget it, and we'll pay you under the original contract terms. If it doesn't go ahead, we'll pay you. The conditions of contract, well obviously in one letter you're not going to get a document like that. All you've got to do is refer to it. These are the conditions that we're operating this telex of intent under until such time we've got a formal contract. And that is what I've just said, the waiver of intent letter. This letter will lapse when we finally sign the contract. Now, what happens is, in more and more cases, it's a telex. Things are left to the last minute and you get a telex at 5:30 on a Friday night saying to start on Saturday morning. This is the authority to do it. Really, before you start, you've really got to answer that telex or letter and say, yes, I agree to those terms, we will start, subject to a formal contract being signed at a later date. If you don't do that, you haven't got your acceptance.
Will be signatures exchanged on the letter of intent as well?
No, it's not necessary, provided that there's an acknowledgement of the letter of intent.
And it's the same with the telex?
Yes. Still a legal document. The intent is there, you see, to form this contract. Before that acknowledgement goes back to the client or from the subcontractor to the main contractor, all the required checks must have been performed. For example, checking of the tax status of the contract to make sure these, whether you're not taxed on them or not, etc., etc. As if the letter of intent was a formal subcontract order. Now we go on with the importance of checking through the contract documents a bit later, but it's obvious that you've got to make sure that all those terms are to your satisfaction before you're going to start work or acknowledge that instruction. So, quite important really, that they're being used more and more as a stopgap to get, to oil the wheels of contracting so that people can operate more quickly, people can get onto site more quickly. I much prefer to see it signed contract under the belt, but it'll work.
Once you've started work under telex of intent, you're not entering then a contract of performance to a certain degree?
Yes, but I think you enter into a contract as soon as you accept the letter of intent. Yes, you've certainly got it by performance, but you've also got it by a document, you've also got it written. The letter of intent is a form of written contract, really. You put in your tender, and that's your offer. He's accepted it by a letter of intent. Some of the minor details haven't been sorted, but it's still a written contract. And yes, when you do go about performing the contract, you've got it by performance as well. Okay? To really summarise construction contracts, I don't believe there are any aspects at all of construction that do not warrant a construction type contract being signed. I mean, you've obviously got building works, civil engineering works, mechanical works, pipe work, electrical, instrumentation, offshore construction, all the peripherals as well. really warrant a construction type contract. For example, Jim's gone out, is it good? Training services are a good example. When somebody is working in a construction environment, no matter what services they're providing, it warrants a construction type contract being signed because of things like insurance liabilities, covering people's while on the site, etc. You know, even scrap removal from the site. All those sort of things, I consider anyway, require a formal construction type contract to be signed. A lot of people would disagree with that, but I've gone the maximum better safe, sorry. Right. That's really the basis of construction contracts. Anybody got any questions before we go to contract conditions? Oh. Right. Of any construction contract, the most important aspect is the rules by which the parties will operate the contract. That really is what contract conditions are. I don't know if any of you or all of you have seen examples of contract conditions. They can range anything from a two-sided piece of paper to a document that thick. It depends how many aspects of the contract the two parties wish to cover, principally the client wishes to cover, and how twitchy it is that the contract's going to pull one over on. Because what happens after every contract, the client or the contractor, when he's employing a subcontractor, tries to stitch the holes up that somebody just walked through on the previous contract. Hence the fact they get bigger and bigger and bigger, trying to cover all the gaps. Contract conditions are basically a list of clauses which the contract will operate. They dictate the performance of the parties under the contract and hold them to those clauses to those parties to act in a certain manner under certain conditions. There are several forms of contract, well, a lot of forms of contract operating in the construction industry. These are split into two main groups really. There are standard conditions published by learned bodies, and there are client's own conditions which he develops because he thinks he's smarter than most of the learned bodies, or that he wants to make sure that he's covered more facts and more loopholes in those conditions. Has anybody got any examples of standard type conditions?
How was it worded?
Sorry?
How was it contracted?
No, I'm thinking of publications. Anybody heard of?
There are some secondary
specification type.
Well,
is it female or something like that?
Well, anybody heard of the ICE 5th edition? Right. That is a very, very widely used form of contract, conditions of contract. JCT, that is the Joint Contracts Tribunal. That's used generally in building works. I think probably one of the ones that's used most in offshore is FIDIC. Yeah? Federation International or something like that. It's one of the international forms of contract. GC Works 1 is another one. That tends to be used by the government. For example, British Nuclear Fuels at Windscale operate those conditions, government contracts, GC Works 1. And the Institute of Mechanical Engineers model forms, have a number of model forms. One of the widely used ones is Model 4A, which is particularly for mechanical works. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's those are 5 of the common ones. There are quite a number of other ones. I think probably, as I say, that's probably the one that's used on offshore more than anything. Unless clients go, well, these are just examples. I mean, there are literally dozens and dozens of them. But British Steel have their own form of contract. Whenever they employ a contractor on British Steel collaboration sites, whether it's in South Wales, Teesside, Scotland, they use their own conditions. CGB are the same. They use their own form of contract. ICI in particular have many forms of contract that they use. Most of them are their own. Sometimes they go outside and use the standard forms. British Gas sometimes use their own. Sometimes use the IC 5th edition. In fact, they're using the IC 5th edition or variants of it more and more. And Shell, for example, one of the other companies who have their own conditions, tend to be a lot thicker than the standard types. Basically, they are based very often on one of the standard types. One of the ones that's used as a base for the client's own conditions very often is the IC 5th edition, which tends to be an all-purpose type of contract condition. There's a third type, and that's really using one of the two, but varied quite considerably by the client. He'll build in all sorts of additional clauses to suit the particular project. You know, this will limit the thickness because he's stuck about an extra 20 or 30 clauses in it. These are usually of the same type, the same number of clauses, and you'll suddenly find an extra 20 pages on the back of that because he's building a lot more new clauses. So there's one type, there's the client's own, and then there's an adulterated version where the client chops it about and changes it. I'll give you one example of how daft it can get. One particular job that my firm carried out 2 or 3 years ago was over in Ireland. It was the big alumina plant over on the west coast of Ireland. And in 1979, when we were tendering for the job, we set over the contract conditions. And I wasn't exaggerating before when I said we were that deep. It was my job to go through and vet them. I had to read it twice before I even got a gist of what it was about. It's like reading the combined works of Shakespeare and trying to sort it all out. Absolutely devastating. And we were supposed to operate that contract. Even the client didn't know what we were supposed to be doing and what we weren't supposed to be doing with the contract. So you just get stupid and out of hand. At the end of the day on that job, for every clause that we were supposed to do something, somewhere else in the document was the one that said the opposite. So we were really in the driving seat. So it really can get out of hand sometimes.
What do you do if you get what you might consider an unreasonable condition? Do you immediately go back to the client and say, look, we can...
Right. You get the contract conditions when you're tendering for the job. The estimator is putting the price together. The contract conditions and the insurance clause and everything else usually go to somebody else. They make them to me, they come to somebody else in my department. What we tend to do is we pick out the onerous ones, the ones you just can't accept. Because most clients nowadays don't accept qualifications very readily. You say there's no competition about, you want the work, we're going to price it. If there's something that we just can't accept, for example, unlimited liability, right? We usually go back to them and say, yes, we'll do the job at that price, but we want our liability limited. That's the most common one that we have a problem with. So in answer to your question, you can go back if you like. You may turn around and say, sorry, we're not going to accept any qualifications, price it.
And then it's up to you whether you do it or not, yeah?
Yeah, it's up to you whether you do it or not. In Ireland, they've got a much better system. In Ireland, there are so few contractors that what they do is they say they have six contractors bidding for a job. They all get together, all the legal guys get together and say, well, we're not going to set that clause, that clause, that clause, that clause. And they have an organisation over there called the CIF, Construction Industries Federation. You don't see the man from the CIF when they say, right, go and see the client on our behalf and tell him that none of us are going to bid the work unless he changes these clauses. So he goes along and the client says, great, okay, I'm not going to get a job built, we'll change the clauses.
Isn't that sort of ringing to keep the competition?
Is it?
It's not ringing, you know.
Not really.
Getting together to actually change the contract.
No, not ringing so much. They're not contriving to fix a price. All they're saying is that these contract conditions are unfair. You know, we can't possibly. I'm asking the guy from the CAF to go along and say, sort it out. And I'm not prepared to accept it. Client can always go out back and say, you know, okay, don't bid it, we'll go outside the country and get somebody else. But not a bad idea, I don't think. But you have got something like that on this yeah, really, when those contract conditions come in, the most important thing that you'll do apart from getting the price right of the bid is to go through those contract conditions and identify anything that is really disadvantageous. So just too onerous to be able to price or to be able to support. First thing is to be aware of them. You know, you may be aware of them and then the managing director, whoever puts his signature on the bid, is prepared to accept it and take a risk or price it. But if you're not aware of it in the first place, you've got no chance of being able to make a decision on it. So it's a very important act, checking those contract conditions. And of course, when you finally get awarded the contract and it goes out to the site construction people, that information can then be passed down the line. All those points can be identified to the people who are going to build the job, so that they know what to do, what not to do, what to look out for, what letters they've got to write, what notices they've got to give, etc., etc. It's a very efficient way of making sure that everybody knows the job and what to do and what not to do. Any other questions on that item 4?
Yeah, conditions regarding payment.
Yeah.
If you get to a stage within a contract where the terms of the contract change drastically from the original intent, i.e. the scope of work changes such that it changes, if you like, the basis of the job. Where does the contractor stand when you're actually negotiating new terms of payment? For instance, it may have done a lot of work in rectifying the numerous changes that go on, and those changes cannot be justified under, say, a lump sum or quantification that way.
That's really a mixture of 6 and 7. Mainly 7. It's a variation to what you originally bid on. If you don't like it again, I'll leave that point. Yeah. But I'll remember to come back to it. Okay. Right, anything else in that section?
You mentioned pricing. If there's a condition, is that increasing your price?
Take an allowance of it, I'd rather say.
Just to cover your ass for
it? Yeah, that's right. I mean, if somebody wants you to, let's see, restrict the amount of hours you work on a day-to-day because of certain fire hazards, but he's not prepared to tell you when that's likely to be. It could be all of one day, none of the next, 4 hours on the next day, and he wants you to take consideration about any price. The first thing you're going to do is scratch your head and say, well, how am I supposed to price that? I don't know when it's going to happen, what the effect of it's going to be, how long it's going to be, how many hours I'm going to lose to that whole job. That sometimes happens. You've got a problem then. You've got to decide whether you're going to take a risk and put in a little bit of money to cover you for a figure that you think is a likely figure, or you're going to write back and say, I'm sorry, we're not prepared to, but whenever we are stopping work, we won't pay on day work. We won't have hours recovery. That's the decision that I'm talking about. You either price it or you qualify it. Stick the money against it.
That building contingencies for, say, the beginning of the year, January, where everybody gets a wage increase. Yeah. Your contract says that at a certain period in time, we increase this by 8% or 10% of what the case may be.
It depends really if you're on a fixed price job or one that allows you to recover additional costs. But if it's a fixed price job, obviously that's something you're going to do.
Like a weather window offshore where you're dependent on good weather to do a particular job, and you can't forecast what the weather might be, so you've got to put some in to cover that.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you're obviously priced to do the job, but it's with a weather window.
Yeah.
There might be an overlap at either end, where you may have an extended window, or it may be a contracted one. And that's your risk. So you're going to price it.
And if you're going to price a qualification, it's always better to spell it out that you've done it, and it's up to the client then to either drop the qualification or accept it.
That's right.
Because you may be the most competitive contractor, and for a few extra thousand, you can cover that qualification.
That's right. But just one word of caution before I move on to the next one, and that's really that if you're going to price it, you've got to remember that you're in competition with other companies who may not price it. Their bid may become more attractive because you've struck an extra bit of money on equipment to yours.
Could you actually, we assume you're drawing up a contract or you're pricing a contract, could you actually qualify that condition to the client in as much as due to a weather window, we may have to charge this amount of money, X amount of money, but if that weather window doesn't appear, we will repay that amount.
You can write anything you want into your contract. It's whether he's prepared to accept it or not is up to him.
Because you're saying that one contractor can price it.
When I say price it, I mean build into your rates.
Yeah.
Build into your rates. What you can do exactly what I'm saying. If you want, you can say, if we lose time through inclement weather, we haven't priced for that. We want it paying that day work, or we want a percentage increase in our rate whenever to cover that.
I was thinking more in terms of the lump sum contract, fixed price contract.
Yeah. But I mean, you will probably have day work rates associated with that lump sum to measure any changes to the lump sum. So you can still say the same thing. Or you can build in, if your fixed price is £10,000, you can build in £1,000 cover you for that lost time that you anticipate you may lose.
Would it be sorry to make the point, but would it be a normal type of condition for you to say, well, okay, we're doing this job for £10,000, we've got a provision in here for bad weather. If that doesn't come about, we will repay you £1,000. Is that a normal type of thing?
No.
Can you keep
£1,000? It's cocky, that. It's a risk. You see, what you're doing is you're making yourself less competitive by pricing it. But if you're successful in being awarded the job and things don't look so, it's extra profit for you. So it's one against the other. Placing a contract, close to a contract. I think we've very basically run through the procedure, but what happens is the client sends out the inquiry document. The contractor sends back the tender, that's the offer, to form the work for consideration or the price. The client appraises all the different contractors' bids and balances price against quality of service. That's the usual way. It isn't just on price. Most people think, providing we put the cheapest price in, we're going to get the work. It only applies if you're doing exactly what he wants you to do and everybody's pricing on the same basis. You take into consideration qualifications or lack of qualifications. Who is prepared to take the biggest risk? And are we going to get the service off him, and is the price right? Eventually he comes up with his choice and he accepts one contractor's tender. Contractor will confirm that acceptance and the parties will then sign the contract. That is when the contract is formed. And from the moment of that signature, putting his name on that piece of paper, unless there's a letter of intent, we have a contract. Okay. That really, it's a very, very short section, but it really just sets the scene for what we're about to go on to. Okay. Reimbursement. Consideration that we talked about right at the start in construction contracts is nearly always money. Right? It's all the contractor wants. It's all he's in business for, is to make money. He'll sell his services and his expertise and wants to receive money back as consideration. The part of the contract which lays down how the contractor is going to get paid, therefore, is obviously very important as far as contracts is concerned, very important as far as the client's concerned as well, because he's shutting out. There are a lot of different methods of reimbursement in construction projects. Anybody got any suggestions or ideas?
Different phases of the project as it progresses through completion.
Lump sum milestones.
Milestones.
Lump sum milestones, yeah.
Day rates.
Day rates,
Cost
yeah.
plus.
Cost plus.
Variations of that? No, it's day rates.
This is not exhaustive either. Scheduled rates includes measured rates and day rates.
What's the difference between lump sum and fixed price?
I was hoping you might ask that. Glad you did. I'm glad someone... Okay, let's just take these. Let's take them in turn. Lump sum, that's a single price to do a job of work. Or it could be a single succession of prices. Let's just take these. One price to do the job. Fixed price, that's also a single price to do the job. The difference between the two is that fixed price, you've built in your increases in cost over the duration of the contract. So inflation, wage increases, etc. Lump sum, that will have some method of recovering those increases in cost or that inflation, whether that is on the formula or whether it is net increases as you can demonstrate them. You very often hear the term lump sum fixed price. What that means is fixed price. It's a fixed price job. A lump sum basically is a contract where you get your extras and increased costs. Lump sum is fixed. Now that really goes back to the point we were making before. It's something you've got to build into your price. You've got to be almost on, in previous years, it's not too bad now because the rate of inflation slowed down, but you had to have your crystal ball out to try and find out what the estimated rate of inflation is going to be in, say, 2 years' time. The contracts sometimes extend 2 or 3 years, and we had galloping 20% inflation at one time. So that was very, very difficult. And we had a whole department set up to try and work out graphs and where we were going to be in 3 or 4 years' time. Scheduler rates, that's clearly rates that are applicable for an unquantified amount of work. So the client isn't able to say, well, at the end of the day, we're going to build an oil rig. So therefore that's the quantities. He's building something else that is totally defined. You may get a service contractor on to go and fix pipes in the road, where they're going to be, how much work the contractor is going to have from time to time. Therefore, he needs a method of paying them, which everybody understands. So he says, we've done that today, we'll get paid for that today, right, in that location. Bill of quantities is the other side of that coin. It's where you know approximately the quantity of material and the labour involved in that job at the end of the day. So, all those quantities are billed out, all those labour items are billed out, and the rates are placed against that. Cost reimbursable, it's really what it says. Contractor gets paid paid his costs for carrying out the work, plus a fee or a percentage. And finally, target cost, that's where the contractor and the client agree what the cost will be at the end of the day, and then the performance is measured against that target. And there's usually, there is a saving on the cost. The client and the contractor share that as a part of the problem. If there is an overspend, the contractor usually foregoes his fee and does it just for the cost. There are advantages and disadvantages of all of them. I could probably talk here for an hour just going through the advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, from a contractor's point of view, in certain circumstances, this one is very acceptable because you can't lose. In some circumstances, this is acceptable to both parties because the contractor doesn't get his cost back. He's never going to make an absolute fortune unless he really finishes the job early and saves on the cost, in which case they usually share it. This one, he gets paid for everything that he does at rates, but each one of those rates is a little lump sum or a little fixed price, and if the job doesn't quite go according to plan or the leg play or whatever, he may have a problem making money. That one, similarly, he doesn't know either what quantities he originally did the job on. You know, he may have to go out and only work for half an hour in one day, in which case he's going to lose on his travelling. Fixed price tends to be the norm at the moment. Most clients want people's price fixed so that they don't carry, the clients don't carry any risk. Contractor doesn't like fixed price because he carries all the risk. But that's the way people are doing it at the moment. Lump sums, again, you've got to try and build in all your contingencies into that lump sum. The only saving grace it's got is that you usually got a cost escalation formula by which to recover your increases. So that's basically it. I can go on a bit longer on this one if you want, but if you've got any questions, just fire away.
You usually combine one or more of those, can't you, to form the agreement?
Yes, you can, and very often you'll start off on one and change to another. A number of contracts I've been on have started off as lump sums and ended up cost reimbursable because the client made such a hash of the design or something in the contract that it no longer becomes anything like the, I think as you raised the point, anything like the contract that they first bid on. So the client's got no option but to say, okay, this is a completely different contract. You can't possibly carry the risk anymore because it isn't the same job. We'll go on to a cost reimbursable or a target cost.
Is he forced to renegotiate then?
Under certain circumstances, yes. There's a term which we call at large. If a contract, some of the conditions carry 15% clause and variations. And the bottom form A, the mechanical engineers does. If you go over 15%, it's invaluable. The contract becomes at large. You go back and renegotiate the contract any way you want. I like to think that 15% is a good percentage because I think that's pretty fair. Very often the contractor is prepared, he's getting money out of his extras, and he's quite happy to go on the same terms. But if things are going sour, then you just say, hold on a minute, you know, we want to see the chairman of your company, or we want to see your top man. We're not prepared to go on this basis. Yeah, you can force him to do it. Clearly, you know, if the intent of the contract has changed or what you bid, it really goes back to where we started off. You know, the intent of the contract was to provide services to be paid in a certain way. If the extent of those services has changed out of all proportion, then you basically breach a contract. Okay. Obviously, you know, as far as operating these ones are concerned, the lump sum and the fixed price are a lot easier to operate from the client's point of view and from the contractor's point of view. That one, you need to pull on a quantity surveyor or somebody out there measuring. You know, everything that's done the same with that one. Everything has to be measured, billed, agreed with the client's surveyors, and eventually put into an account. That one, all you've got to do is monitor rough percentages complete and just apply that to your lump sum.
However, you want to be aware of every change made.
Oh yes. Yes, measuring is of course the only way to do that, so that you pick up all the extras. Not really important on that one. Although you probably have to provide as per the drawing, so you probably need to change it anyway. For that one, except that you've got to update your target on that one. You've agreed a target of say £100,000 to do a job, and it's going to cost you £150,000. There must be a reason for it. It's usually because there's more work carried out than you originally based your original target on. These two, for valuation purposes, the percentage will do. To make sure you're picking up all the extras to contract, everything's going to be measured. But it isn't important from a valuation point of view just to get the progress. Right. I won't go into the scale of payments and the 40 days and all contracts are different. Some provide for payment to the 28 days following the end of the work. Some provide for a certificate to be raised by the client within 30 days and then payment 28 days thereafter. All terms of payment basically favour the person shelling out the money. I'm never in too much of a hurry to hand the money over. But again, you were aware of what those terms of payment are right from the start, so you wouldn't build that into your price. The financing of that money. Okay. You'd rather not be able to gain the interest on it in the bank because it's tied up with the client, or you're not going to be able to reinvest it and earn money on it that way.
You have retention as well then?
Retention.
10% retention.
Yeah, most contracts.
As per drawings and stuff.
Yeah, most contracts will allow for the deduction of the retention amount during the course of the contract. Let's say 10%. At the end of the contract, when you get your completion certificate, they give you 5% back. And then 12 months later, when the maintenance is expired, you get your eventual other 5% back. That also has a financing impact, which you've got the price.
Excuse me, do you get the 5% plus any interest on it, or is it just the bare 5%?
Bare 5%. You deem to have allowed that elsewhere in the price. Right. Section 7. We've got about 20 minutes to cover the last two. Anybody know the difference? Can you all read those? Variation to contract, extra to contract. They aren't the same thing. Does anybody know what the difference is?
Design change on variation to contract. An extra something that's additional to the known scope originally.
Completely new.
Or completely new, yeah.
Any other ideas?
Variation to the contract actually affects the term of the contract, whereas the extra actually affects the work to be executed.
Contract and
an influence by a third party, say something.
No, it's a lot more simpler than that. Extra to contract means it's something extra to what you originally priced to do. Okay. So you're entitled to extra payment for it. It's a variation to contract. It means that the contract has changed in some way, which may or may not entitle you to extra money. It may entitle you to less money. It may reduce the scope of work. It may change the method by which you were supposed to operate, which in actual fact there is a saving there. That is they're used synonymously and they aren't the same thing. The variation requires a variation order. It doesn't always have a monetary impact. And it doesn't always have a monetary impact upwards. Sometimes it has a monetary impact downwards. That always has a monetary impact. That is extra. Something you didn't price and you weren't paying for it. That's the fundamental point I was really going to make. There isn't a contract that's ever been operated that hasn't had a change. No contract ever ever operates in exactly the way that it was intended to be. There is always some sort of change. You know, when I'm talking about those outside influences that often affect contracts like weather, we've talked about already this afternoon, product failure, engineering and design errors and problems, so nothing ever gets transferred from the drawing board directly to the site in exactly the same way as it was intended. Therefore, the contractor is going to have to change his construction techniques or something about the way he performs the contract. He's going to have to do it differently to what he originally did on. He may have to change his, as I say, construction techniques, the timing of the contract, the labour force, the numbers of men, the peaks in the labour. This usually involves extra cost because you've got to give the contractor some sort of credit for pricing the job to get the optimum efficiency out of all the resources he's using, so he's going to make the most money. If that is changed to circumstances outside his control, then it isn't going to be optimum. And normally, it's going to cost him money. He wants paying for that. As I say, variations can decrease scope as well as increase it, so it doesn't always mean extra money for that one. We've already talked about some of the ways that we can be reimbursed for contracts, but what about reimbursement for extras to contract? Anybody got any ideas on those?
Renegotiate.
Well, if you get past the acceptable level, yes, you
Star rate.
Star rate's a good one. Star rate, do you know what star rate is?
It's a rate that's agreed for doing that particular job.
Right, so you've got rates in the job. What usually happens is the contract usually allows for analogous rates. So you go on and you say, okay, let's see, to do that bolt up, I'm going to get paid £2 for that, but there's a 2.5 inch bolt there, which is almost the same job, a little bit more, but I want £2.50. That's fair, you know, and it's a reasonable assessment. So that basically is a star rate. That's often the way that we do get paid for extras. Day work, of course, is probably one that many contractors try and go for because it's a surefire way of getting paid for every hour that you've spent. The other way, of course, is measured rates. There are usually rates for every operation, particularly in the bill of quantities type of job, or a scheduled rates job, and you just measure it as if it was in the original scope of work.
And even in the lump sum, the initial contract, you still have a clause in there for additional work.
Yes.
And such as bill of quantities, day rates, as you say.
That's right. You've usually got some method built into the lump sum or the fixed price job, whereby you're going to recover extra works if they occur.
Yeah. Or in fact, there may be such that you'll have to submit the variation order along with a new lump sum.
Right. That was the next one. Lump sum prices. Really, I mean, you can call star rates lump sum prices, but if the job is worthy of it, you can price it as if it's a little job in its own right, and price it as an extra lump sum.
Yeah, the only problem in our industry with it is that usually isn't the time.
Right.
The need for variation has been found offshore, and we can't afford to wait till an estimator can take a look at it and somebody price it out, and then the contracts people put it in the right words and submit it.
Right. I've never actually worked offshore, but what happens in situations like that onshore that I've found is that you usually got a surveyor or somebody, contracts manager on site, who's prepared to put his name onto an estimate of man hours. And they'll say that is going to take 20 hours to do, and submit the price within a day on a variation. And you win some, you lose some.
Yeah, we have variations, or we've been known to use variation orders where the offshore representative on behalf of the client signs acknowledging that he accepts there's a need to do that work, and the final price will be negotiated on the beach.
Right. That's a good idea.
Then you can allow continuity of the work, and the money side can be forward on the beach.
And it takes the pressure out of the heat out of the situation. That's a good idea. There's a last method as well, which we haven't discussed, and that's cost plus. Very often the client will say, okay, I want you to buy something, I'll pay you invoice plus percentage. Or I want you to carry out some work, there are no rates applicable to this, tell us what it costs, and at all-in cost, and I'll give you a percentage markup on it. That's just another method of doing it.
John, how valid is the wording, somebody signs a timesheet or additional worksheet, and they just sign underneath for record purposes only? Is that legal? Or?
Yeah, it's legal. It's, I think if I was signing a timesheet, that's what I'd put on it. But don't forget, for record purposes only, what does for record purposes only mean? It means that you are signing those hours as a record of being having expended. All it means is he isn't authorised to be able to get payment for it. Argue that with somebody else. Yes, I think it's a sensible thing for somebody who isn't sure of his position, but is quite aware that the contract with somebody else has spent so many hours on the job to do that. As a contractor, I'd much rather see him sign for payment purposes. Yeah, it's quite nice. Telling you exactly why, under what terms is agreed those hours.
Sorry about that.
Who's heard the term puberation time?
Yeah.
Does anybody know what it means?
It's a puberation factor.
Yeah, puberation factor. In any extra to contract, there is a disruption element, commonly called puberation, which really involves stopping the work that you're on, moving your resources, your men, your plan, to wherever the variation is, carrying out the variation or the extra, moving back again and restarting the work. That isn't just a simple matter of measuring the bit of work that's done in the middle. There's all the disruption at either end of it. But just drawing it to your attention because some of you are probably in a position where you've got to get hours agreed with people, and 2 hours for doing the work isn't going to recover you for 8 hours total disruption. Always worth remembering that. Cover that a little bit more in this last section. Any final questions on that section, sir? No? Right. Claims, litigation, and arbitration. Let's go straight on to claims. We haven't got very long. Does anybody know what a contractual claim is and how it arises? No?
We can't reach an agreement. Under the terms of the contract, you actually do more than being on the plate.
Right. That's it. Yes, I couldn't put it any better. When a contractor believes that he's lost money which the client won't reimburse under one of the methods we've just discussed, he has no other option but to formulate a claim. Sometimes it's the other way around, of course. I mean, the client feels that the contractor's let him down badly, and he puts a counter-claim for money off the contractor. But for the purposes of today, we'll just discuss those claims by the contractor onto the client. If the contractor is going to have any success at all in pursuing a contractual claim, there's certain things that he must have done, whether those are legal or whether those are practical. For example, by practical, I mean that if he hasn't performed the contract to the client's satisfaction, you've got no chance of getting the claim settled, because the client isn't going to feel very well disposed to him. So he's got to have done a reasonable job, and lost. The second thing is he's got to have demonstrably lost money. The client isn't going to feel very disposed about giving him extra money because he's made a whacking great profit already. The losses that he's incurred have to be down to the direct default of the client, unless the client feels like giving him an extra gracious sum. For example, if the weather's been that poor, and he had to take into build into his price a certain amount of risk for weather, but it's so, it's gone so bad. And at least I'm not thinking about the offshore application, because weather is a little bit different there. He may feel that, okay, he's done a good job, he's lost money, we'll give him a handout. It doesn't often happen, but sometimes it does. The contractor has to have given the notices that the contractor requires. He must have written all the letters telling the client when things went wrong at the time that the contract says it had to write them. You know, dear engineer, today we had a strike. We are likely to require an extension of time. Please can we have some cost attached to that strike, if the contract allows for strikes to be paid with cost. Or we had disruption due to several variations or several extras of contract that were being carried out. A lot of the labour had to go away and was moved, and our programme was disrupted. We then require an extension of time and cost of extra money. The last thing he's got to do is to mitigate the losses that he's incurred. If he's just standing around, if he's got no work for the men because something's happened on the job and he just leaves them standing around, right, that isn't mitigating the losses. He's got to try his best to get the men fixed up somewhere else. You know, try and get the maximum productivity elsewhere out of them, or else he isn't mitigating those losses. Providing that he's met all those things, then the client may well feel well disposed towards him and come to a settlement. Claims documents themselves really are made up of three main areas. There's the narrative, which is really the history of what happened, and why it happened, whose fault it was, what contract clauses covered different items. The second part is the financial evaluation. That was the effect of what happened, cause and effect. It's the effect of what actually happened and the amount of money that he wants at the end of the day. And usually lastly, in the back, there's a photostat of all the relative correspondence between the client and the contractor and the client, giving notices, backwards and forwards. What usually happens then is they all get together at a big meeting, and or several big meetings spread over a month or a year or 5 years, depending on how much diametrically opposed they are to start with. And eventually, a deal is done whereby the client will agrees to pay some money over the contract, begrudgingly accepts it. He never gets all his claim, and usually the client ends up paying something. So somewhere in the middle they meet. But occasionally, they don't agree, and they're so far apart that the contractor isn't prepared to leave it alone, and the client isn't prepared to pay him anything, and they then have no recourse but to go to an outside source for a judgment. What I'm talking about is obviously litigation and arbitration. Does anybody know the difference between litigation and arbitration? No? Well, arbitration is an independent body. Well, so is litigation as well. Litigation is through the courts. Yeah. Arbitration is through an independently appointed arbitrator. And the main differences are that in the case of arbitration, the arbitrator is technically expert, usually an engineer, but legally a layman. He doesn't understand the law all that well. In the case of litigation, it's held in a court of law, as opposed to a big room like this. It's held in a court of law, and there's a judge or official referee. And he is legally expert, but he is technically a layman. So you've got a problem, because you can end up in a situation whereby the case, your argument hangs on a legal or contractual technicality and be there in front of an arbitrator, or vice versa. You can be trying to argue a claim that hangs on a technical point and be in front of a judge. That entails a calling of expert witnesses, engineers, all that sort of thing.
Who decides which way you're going to go?
Well, the contract conditions usually have an arbitration clause. Right? So the first exploratory probes by either side usually head towards arbitration. But the parties can agree not to go to arbitration, to go to litigation. And the main reason why they might want to go to litigation is it's usually quicker, but the only problem is it's held in open court. Arbitration is reverse. If you don't want to wear your dirty washing in public, you hold an arbitration behind closed doors. In which case, that's the route you'll choose.
Do you agree to be binding on both parties before you go into it, or is it part of your contract?
You agree the arbitrator himself before you enter into the arbitration. We're just starting one now where we applied to the Institute for Civil Engineers to nominate 3 arbitrators, of which we had to select one. One was acceptable, 2 weren't. Fortunately, the one we found acceptable was acceptable to the other side as well. So we will be binding by this arbitrator's decision. Unlike litigation where you haven't got much choice really, you know, you get an official referee appointed and you've got to accept him and his decision.
Why you go to appeal?
Sorry?
Could you go to appeal after litigation if you didn't agree?
You can go to appeal after litigation. It's more difficult to go to appeal after arbitration, but it is possible to do it. In actual fact, you go to a judge to appeal against an arbitrator.
And then if you work to go to litigation after arbitration?
Yeah, this not very often happens. Usually, the decision is made on, not idiots. They're usually well-considered opinions and usually fair. But both parties might not be happy, but it costs them more money to respectable. It's quite an expensive business. So you don't enter into arbitration or litigation lightly. It's expensive.
Is the cost borne by both parties?
Sometimes it's borne, both parties carry their own costs. Sometimes, if it all heavily goes down on the side of one party and against the other, the side that it goes against will carry the costs. If it's borne by both parties, it's called costs in cause, where you pay your own costs. I've just about run out of time. I haven't got much time for questions, about a minute. But
well, you're all right for 5 minutes, John. If there's any questions forthcoming.
I mean, arbitration and litigation is fascinating, I think. That's the most interesting part of my job. I've got a litigation and arbitration going at the moment. I'm no expert. I've not been involved in it for that long. It's something that I'm learning about all the time. I'm not a lawyer, but when you're talking to lawyers and counsel and barristers, you pick a lot of it up, and you're keen to learn. It is very, very interesting, and so you do tend to pick it up. But it is expensive. You're much better getting your problems sorted out while it's still on the side.
If you've got we're obviously not talking about a large contract, a small contractor takes a contract, and halfway through the contract he finally runs out of money or he can't raise enough finance. How does he then go about withdrawing from that particular contract?
Well, the contract allows for determination. Usually there's quite explicit clauses of determination by the employer. You can get rid of the contract virtually at will. In order to have the payment the amount of work is done up to a certain date and payment of recompense for loss of profit and this, that and the other. But if the boot's on the other foot, you've usually got to, if the contractor goes broke, is really what you're saying. Usually at the start of the job there is a warranty clause which will cover the client against any bankruptcy on behalf of the contract. So it's covered in that respect by the insurance policy. However, if the contractor wants to pull out for any other reason, he can do it. It costs him money. What usually happens is the clause that says if the contractor is not going to complete his obligations, the employer withholds the right to employ somebody else to do it and charge the contractor with it. And in fact the receiver, if he's one of the receivership. But in that case, he probably won't get much because he might be rolling the creditors for his money.
In some cases, when you talk about large contracts, the employer does an investigation into the contractor's accounts or his well-being financial management. If he satisfied himself at that time, so obviously a sale company got back and learned something from either the parent company or whatever, who will take the responsibility and still go back to the old contractor?
Yeah, because there'd be nothing in the contract that says that the client has to go along and check out this contract. Because what it usually says in the contract is that I, as a contractor, warrant that I am capable of performing the job and financially viable, etc. Usually in the case of bankruptcy, it's the contractor or the insurance company that goes account for it. Okay.
Well, if there's no further questions, gentlemen, the tea is up. I'd like to thank John on behalf of all of you for taking the trouble to come across here and speak for an hour and a half. I'm sure you found it very enlightening. We usually do. Anyway, thanks for listening as well.
Thank you, John.
Teas and